Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Young. I am the site manager here at the CSS Neuse Museum. I want to welcome all of you on our 10th anniversary plus one. Technically, it was yesterday. It was our 10-year anniversary from when we opened, but this is close enough. My program this afternoon is called Professionals, Amateurs, Deserters, and Heroes, the crew of the CSS Neuse. When I started here over 11 years ago, we had very, very basic information on the crew. We had the names of about 30 individuals. It was typewritten or typed, and we had a little bit of biography information, mostly on the officers, but not so much on the crew itself. And when I decided to go back to grad school and get my master's degree during COVID, it did have its benefits, COVID. I decided that this is something I wanted to take a deeper dive into. So where did I get all the information? Well, there's a lot of different places, and part of the research process is tracking down where all these things are, where all this information is, and how to get it and how to go through it. Something that really helps is the official records of the Union and Confederate Navies. These are affectionately known as the ORNs. They're published in Washington between 1894 and 1922. That's right, almost 60 years after the end of the war, Congress is getting around to publishing these. These are mostly the official correspondence. These are letters and reports and muster rolls of ships and communications between commanders. 30 volumes, they have illustrations, they have maps, they have portraits. Some of that was helpful, but most of it was not. The things that were very helpful were the National Archives, again found online, the crew and the pay roster, individual service records for the men who had served in the Army before going to the Navy. You have the roster of North Carolina troops. You have the personal diary of one of the officers on board, census records from 1860, and then North Carolina post-war Confederate pension applications, and the North Carolina Civil War Sailors Project, which is online. So this was one of the first things that I said, okay, I can work with this kind of information. This is a copy of the first quarter 1864 crew and pay roster for the ship. And okay, what you see is there's columns of information. The first column is their particular number. Every sailor on board, when they enlisted, they would be or came on board, they'd be given a number. Then you have the names, first and last, their rank, their pay term, the pay amount, and depending on what rank you were, depending on what you got paid. Their total pay here at the end, again, this is quarterly rosters. You have the signature of the sailor, which is kind of neat. And then off to the side, you have the witness. And the witness is usually the paymaster or another officer. And then down on the bottom, you have the notes. And all of this, every single column has advantages when you're doing research. And I can get into some of that as I move forward a little bit. But name, rank, pay amount, signature, witness, notes. This is something out of the 1860 census. Now, the 1860 census is kind of interesting because it's really the second census that listed everybody in the household. Before 1850, they would list the head of the household and how many people. They would not be listed, so you wouldn't have the name of the wife, you wouldn't have the name of the children, you wouldn't have the names of any boarders that were there, or anybody who was doing labor and happened to be living at the home. You just had the head of household. So by the 1860 census, it lists the head of the household, it lists their age, their sex, their occupation, about how much their farm was worth, so you could understand kind of who was in kind of what social class. And what you have is, as you're going down, this is out of Virginia. This is the Virginia census. I'm trying to remember what county it was for, or Loudoun County in Virginia. And what you find here is Stephen Heflin. And Heflin would go on, this is the 1860 census, of course, 4 years later, he would be Landsman Stephen Heflin, and he would be serving on board the CSS Neuse. So this gives you some basic information. How old were they in 1860? So you just add 4, shows you how old they were when they were serving on board the ship. It also gives, he was a farmhand. Okay? So obviously, if he's working as a farmhand in 1860, he probably is not going to know much about the naval service. And that's also reflected in his rank, landsman, which is at the very bottom rung of the ladder. Landsmen are the lowest. You're not even a seaman. You know nothing about the sea. You are from the land. You are a landsman. And their pay also reflected that. They were at the bottom of the rung for that as well. Actually, not the very bottom rung. Below them was the bottom rung. And below them were boys. That was your rank. You were a boy. Boy first class, boy second class. And usually these were lads, 10, 11, 12 years old. And they were serving, during combat, they would have a very important job. They were called powder monkeys. They would retrieve bags of gunpowder from the gunpowder stores and run them and climb up the ladder and bring them to the gun crews. All right. Post-war pension applications. This is a copy of a post-war pension application for William Butler. Here. 1907, it showed him as 66 years old at the time. I believe he was living in Wayne County. And it just talks about that he did not serve in the Regiment of North Carolina Troops, that he served on the gunboat, and that he could not work, was in a state where he could not function, could not work. So he was applying for a soldier's pension application with the state. By the turn of the century, so by 1900, one of the largest impacts to the budget in southern states was pensions to Confederate veterans. Obviously, the federal government is not paying that. The federal government paid pensions to Union veterans, but it was up to the individual states to pay pensions for Confederate veterans. And this occupied a very large chunk of the state budget every year. Unfortunately, this is the fourth quarter 1864 payroll for the Neuse. This is just how it was scanned in at the National Archives. And unfortunately, as you can see, very, very little of this is actually legible. This drives me crazy. Because here is the information. It's good information, but you just can't read it. I tried swapping out colors, making the white black and the black white, hoping it would clarify a little to nothing. I tried image programs. I downloaded just about everything I could think of on the internet to help me actually read these names, because these are what's important. What you can read, though, some of, are the signatures over here. And remember, I told you, these are the signatures of the sailors that are in this column over here. So by examining these and enlarging them and kind of trying to break them down, I was able to get some names that I didn't have from the previous roster. The other thing that this column does, that you can actually refer back to the 1860 census, is these are all men who are signing their own name. What does that tell you about them? It tells you that they're educated, okay? They can read, they can write. There's actually a column in the 1860 census that says, can read or write, yes or no. And so if I had a name, I was like, okay, there's two names here. Some of the names, unfortunately, on board the ship are very common. John Smith, okay? 18,000 John Smiths in North Carolina. And he could not even be a North Carolinian. He could be from Virginia, he could be from South Carolina. So how did I know which one is mine? Which one belonged to the boat? You don't. But it's clues like this that help you narrow it down. So if I found a guy, John Smith, I think that's actually John Smith right there, okay? John Smith. And I think I have it narrowed down, but in the 1860 census it says cannot read or write, then I know that's not my John Smith. Because he signed his name here. So it's not the same person. So it's little tricks like this that you pick up during doing research that can help you take those puzzle pieces and put them together. This is basically what I started with. This is the typewritten crew roster for the crew in May of 1864. So May 2nd, 1864. There was a what they call a naval rendezvous that was held in Kinston. And that's an old-time Navy term for basically saying it's a recruiting drive. They were trying to recruit people into the Navy to serve on board the ship. And this is a list of the men who they got at that time. And you notice some of them are, quite a few of them are landsmen, some of them are seamen, some of them are ordinary seamen. And those are basically the three ranks that you see. Initially, you don't need much of a crew. What you need are a couple officers to direct the building and construction, and that's where you see people like Lieutenant Sharp and Lieutenant Minor, and they end up getting labor from Hoke's Confederate Brigade to help outfit and finish the ship as it's sitting in Kinston in late 63 and early 64. So you're getting Army contracted labor to finish building a Navy ship. Most of the crew is assigned in the first few months of 1864 all the way up through May. She's commissioned April 22nd, 1864. She does not have a full crew complement when she's into the water and launches. And of course, on that very first day, she runs aground just outside of town. She's stranded there for almost a month. Now, what I've got on the next two slides, I show you I go from this to what I found based on census records and crew rosters and post-war pensions and everything else.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Those people from, that you said,
Mhm.
they were natives of Kinston?
No,
Surrounding?
almost none of them are.
Okay, just was.
They're men from all over the place.
Gotcha.
Um,
I would thought
So
so.
I went from this list to this and this. So I found quite a few more. The ones in red are guys that I have found no more information on. The ones in blue are the officers. The ones in black are the ones I've found more information on than just a name and a rank. So as you can see, most of them are black. I would spend days on one guy and then say, okay, I've exhausted, I have to move on. I move on to the next guy. Some of the officers, obviously, you find more information on than others. But the title of the program is Professionals, Amateurs, Deserters, and Heroes. So let me kind of talk a little bit about each category. So for professionals, we have a couple of the officers. First on the left, one of the most helpful items that I found was the diary of Lieutenant Richard Bako. And Bako he was a South Carolina native. He was at the Naval Academy. He was due to graduate in 1861, and he resigned his commission when South Carolina secedes. He goes home to Charleston. He's put in charge of drilling troops for artillery because he has recent practice in that. Then he's assigned out west to the CSS Arkansas in the Yazoo River. And the Arkansas sees combat, ends up beaching, they destroy the ship. He comes back to the east, and again, he's put in down in Charleston on the Chicora of the Palmetto State, one of the two ironclads before he's sent here to participate or to be part of the Underwriter raid in February of '64, and then he stays as part of the crew of the Neuse, and he ends up commanding the rear gun on board the ship. Joseph Price is interesting. He's born in Wilmington. He's when he takes command of the ship, he's about 29 years old. He ends up being in the Revenue Marine Service, and that is kind of the forerunner of the modern day Coast Guard. But his duty station is California. So when they hear about the war breaking out and about secession, Price resigns his commission in the Revenue Cutter Service and proceeds across land, going west to east. So across the deserts in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana. He gets all the way back to North Carolina. By the time he does, it's 1862. And he decides with his father to enlist in a North Carolina artillery unit. They are both made officers. And he serves in the 3rd Regiment of North Carolina Artillery, Company H, from 1862 until the early part of 1863, when he resigns and joins the Confederate Navy, putting his naval or his boat service, his knowledge of the sea, to use. He serves in the Savannah Squadron, then aboard the CSS Georgia, then the Sampson. He's wounded in the attack on the USS Water Witch in June of 1863. He was I think he was the 3rd officer down. He ends up being in command because the lead of the expedition is killed, the XO is killed, and so he's wounded and he takes command. And he's promoted for gallantry to commander, and then he is, this was his final command station, was being commanded of the CSS Neuse. He's the only, of the 3 captains of the ship, he's the only North Carolina native. So who are the amateurs? We talked about professionals, who are the amateurs? That's just about everybody else. Some of the crew members had prior experience in the Army on artillery pieces, so they knew a little bit about how cannons worked and how cannons function, and some of them put that to use as a member of the crew. But most of the men had never been on an ironclad before. Most of the men had never been on a ship before. Most of the crew were farmers and laborers. That was what you find in the 1860 census. And even some of the officers. Ironclad duty is not glamorous. Ironclad duty was not really desired. They resisted being stationed on board an ironclad because it was hot, it was cramped, it was dirty, it was difficult work. Who are the deserters? Well, I'll point them out, a few of them out to you. By 1864, the beginning of 1864, a number of Confederate ironclads were coming into service. And the Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, told Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, "Sir, I have ships coming online. What I don't have is crew." Because the Army monopolized everything. They took everybody that they could get and threw them into the Army. And so Davis says, "I understand." He has a meeting with General Lee. And he says, basically, General Lee, I need X number of men from your command to transfer out to the Army, or transfer out of the Army into the Navy to serve as crew. Now, picture yourself as a brigade commander in Lee's Army. You are already suffering from disease, desertion, reduced numbers, and then your commanding general says, "Hey, I need you to transfer 15 men out of your brigade to the Navy." Okay? As a brigade commander, are you going to send them your best and brightest? No. You're going to send them the troublemakers, what they call shirkers, the deserters, the guys you have problems with, or men who have been wounded in combat, who are still able to serve but not able to keep up with your command in combat, on the march, on campaign. They're wounded in the foot or the knee, okay, or maybe the head or the neck. Okay? They don't have the stamina or the physical ability necessary to keep up with an army on campaign. So those are the two types of men that end up transferring out of the army and into the Navy. Two very different types of people. Multiple combat wounded and deserters. This is the court-martial papers for John Allen, April 18, 1863. It says that he was tried and found guilty of desertion. Here is his record card out of the Battalion of Virginia Light Artillery. And you can see transferred to the Navy. This is Austin McClanahan, subject to court-martial, November 1863. Charge of desertion, found guilty. Transferred to the Navy, April 11, 1864. William T. Ray, court-martial, April 18, 1863, Army of Northern Virginia, listed as a deserter. Transferred to the Navy. There are others like Robert Clayton, not subject to court-martial, but he was noted as being absent from his command. So he's not officially charged as a deserter, but he was AWOL. Okay? Absent without leave is what it stands for. An old command sergeant major told me that really means absent for women or liquor. That's what it really stands for. Sometimes both. Absent without leave, transferred to the Navy. Then we have the case, which I think is really interesting, of Private Frank W. Pittman, Company H of the 15th Virginia. Private Pittman, when he enlisted in 1861, he listed his occupation as seaman. He was actually a sailor prior to the war. Place of birth, New York City, New York. But he's in Richmond in the spring of 1861. I think that war fever gripped him and he wanted to do something great, so he enlists in the Army. However, he had problems. He was frequently absent from command. He was listed as a deserter. He is charged with desertion. He is found guilty of desertion. Prisoner Frank Pittman be made to wear ball and chain for 3 months. During that period, kept in hard labor, forfeit his pay to the Confederate States. Made to wear the ball and chain and hard labor. Pittman, at the time that he's guilty and he's placed under this sentence, his command fights in the battles of the Army of Northern Virginia and fights at Sharpsburg, where they lose over half their men. The 15th Virginia takes over 50% casualties at Sharpsburg, or Antietam, if you want to call it that. So this probably saved his life. These are all copies of the orders that he was kept in. And you can see here, transferred to the Navy in May or late April, April 30th, 1864. When he came into the Navy, he believed that the Army still owed him money. So he contracted with a fellow sailor who had also been in the Army to act as his attorney to sue the Confederate States Army to receive his back pay. And this was signed off on by the first officer on board the CSS Neuse as a witness, Lieutenant Hogue. Now, we don't know whether he got any back pay or not from the Army, but considering how the Army operated, it's safe to say he probably didn't. So, these are the deserters. And we talk about the heroes. And to me, the hero is somebody who goes into combat, is wounded, survives, and stays. And that's guys like this. Michael Clinton, he enlisted in Troup County, Georgia, which is only 2 counties north of where I'm from, in Muskogee County, Georgia. He enlisted in July 61 with the 21st Georgia. He's sick in the hospital, he's promoted, wounded in the head at the Battle of Second Manassas, August of 62. Returns home, he furloughs, he comes back in April of 63. Then he's wounded severely in the foot at Chancellorsville in May of 63. And he is shown as detached for service on gunboat, which is the CSS Neuse. April 12, 1864. So he arrives in the crew 10 days before her commissioning into the river. Alonzo Peeling enlisted at Rowan County, North Carolina, July 1862. He's a private in the 57th Regiment of North Carolina Troops, wounded at Fredericksburg, hospitalized, returns to duty, and then transferred to the Confederate States Navy at the Rendezvous, which we spoke about before, May 2nd, 1864. Isaac Schugert enlisted in Yadkinville, transferred the 21st Regiment to the Company A, 1st Battalion, North Carolina Sharpshooters. Now, sharpshooter regiments or sharpshooter battalions have a very interesting history, if you want to kind of get into that. They were, I don't want to say elite, but they were certainly a step up above your standard rank and file line infantry. You had to have no record of desertions or basically no black marks, no checks on your record. You had to also be able to hit targets with your weapon at certain distances. And it was really viewed as kind of a step above the standard infantry regiment. So he transfers into the sharpshooter battalion. He's wounded at Hazel River in August of 62, wounded again in May of 1863, and he transfers to the Navy, transferred to CS Navy, April 1864. Then we have these two fellows. Assistant Paymaster John Frank Wheelis, kind of a debonair fellow, I think. Wheelis was from Nashville, Tennessee. Both his parents die by the time he is 14 years old. He is raised by his older brother. His older brother is a banker in Nashville. When the war happens, or just before the outbreak of the war, his brother dies in England, and his body is sent back across the ocean. And that leaves John in a position to enlist. So he decides he's going to enlist in the 1st Tennessee Infantry Regiment. Company C, I believe, of the 1st Tennessee. Now, for those of you who are a little bit familiar with Civil War publications and memoirs, do any of you know the book Company H by Sam Watkins? Company H is about Company H of the 1st Tennessee. Wheelis is in Company C, not Company H. So, kind of the same things going on. Wheelis serves, he's almost immediately promoted to being a lieutenant. He serves as a lieutenant for a year and is promoted to captain and command of the company. He is severely wounded at Perryville in Kentucky, and he's left on the field as the unit retreats. He's captured by the Federal Army, he goes to the hospital, he recovers, and he's eventually exchanged, and he comes back south. The problem is, by the time he gets back, his company has a new officer, has a new commander. So he is what is known as a superfluous officer. He's an officer without a command. So he ends up being stationed on the staff of Leonidas Polk. He's on the staff of Braxton Bragg. And he's given command of a small army post in Georgia at Marietta. And this is not where he wants to be. But he is one of those people who was wounded and can't really keep up with field service. But he wants to do something more than to sit behind the lines and be a garrison commander. So he uses his influence that he has, and because of his pre-war occupation as a banker, he's able to get a position as an assistant Confederate Navy paymaster. He resigns his Army commission in late March of 1864, and his very first duty station, Kinston, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, when I was showing you at the very first, those notes at the bottom of the list, they're signed J.F. Wheelis. It's his signature. The other guy I want to talk about briefly is Lieutenant Francis Hogue. Hogue was a Virginian. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1860. This is his Naval Academy photo. That's why he looks like he's 14. He's actually probably 19 or 20 in this photograph. He ends up coming down as part of the expedition against the in Newburgh, against the Underwriter.
John Taylor Wood.
Yeah, John Taylor Wood, exactly. John Taylor Wood's expedition against the Underwriter. So he's one of the officers in command of the boats. If you know anything about the Underwriter expedition, they quickly board, they overwhelm the Union Navy, and this is a ship in Newburgh, and they're fired on by the batteries, by the Union batteries on shore. And John Taylor Wood, who's the commander, makes the decision that if they can't take Underwriter away, that they're going to blow it up. They're going to destroy it. So they tell Hogue, hey, go down, find the powder charges, ignite the gunpowder charge, get a fuse, light the fuse, get off the ship, and we'll watch it as it explodes. Hogue does exactly that. He helps to set gunpowder charges, sets lights to fuses, gets on the boats, rowing away. They get about 15 minutes out, and there's still no explosion. John Taylor Wood looks at Hogue and says, go back on board and find out why. Hogue says, yes, sir. Knowing that at any moment, the entire ship could go out and explode from underneath his feet. He gets back on board, he finds out that the fuse ran out, and the flame went out. So he extends the fuse, he lights it, he gets back on board, gets up top, back on the boat, row away, huge explosion. For his heroin, he's also, before this, he's wounded twice in combat. He's promoted for gallantry by Jefferson Davis. He ends up being the executive officer on board the CSS Neuse. And recently, within the past 2 years, his descendants, he had no direct descendants, he never married, he never had children, but his brother did. And we got it from his brother's descendants. We have his epaulets, which are the rank epaulets on board. We have his revolver, and we have his sword. And that's been donated to the museum. And it's going to go on permanent display in a little while when we finish configuring things where we want to move them. But those are the first real objects that we have that we can tangibly say belong to somebody on board the ship. We got another donation last weekend. We had the surgeon's manual of the surgeon who served on board the ship donated. It's a loan, but it has the doctor's name and October 8, 1864, penciled in the surgeon's manual. And that surgeon was serving on board the ship at that time. And we know that because part of the research that I've done. So, this is a little bit about Wheelis and about Hogue. I've already told you all this. So, it was a laborious process, and I know more about a lot of these guys than any reasonable person should, just because of all the digging that I had to do. But the folks at Southern New Hampshire University thought it was good enough and they awarded me a master's degree for it. So I was happy to get that. Any questions about the crew? Yes, ma'am.
Well, was that your thesis?
Yes, yeah,
Okay, so it's published?
yes, yeah, you can find it online.
You can publish it and have it here.
Yeah, I looked into that. I don't know if it would generate enough interest to do that though. Yeah, hey Sam.
There's a family rumor of an Alexander Rouse who was a sawyer.
Uh-huh.
He was a Confederate soldier, but he was a sawyer stationed in Newbern.
Okay.
And so if you want to make an inferential leap, you might think that, well, maybe he was cutting wood for the Ram Neuse instead of firewood for some officer. My point is, have you ever heard that name? Is there any way, you know, if there's any way to research records to find out about contractors or people that are working on the Neuse itself?
There's a type of file in the National Archives called the Confederate Civilian Contractor File.
But he was not a civilian. He was a member of the armed forces. He was
Mhm.
a private, but would that make a difference?
You may be able to find his individual service record as well. And his individual service record may have information and if it doesn't, then,
Compiled service record doesn't have it, so that's
okay,
what's good.
then it's gonna be a lot harder to track down without
Okay.
that. A lot of the stuff that I found on the crew is because they had that information in their Army records.
Thank you.
Army records list stuff like height, hair color, eye color, complexion. Some of that is because if they deserted, they want to be able to find out who the heck you are. Because some of these guys would enlist in a unit, get the bounty for joining, desert, and join another unit. And get the bounty, and then desert, and try to join another unit. It happened on both sides, especially when they're offering a $100 bonus or a $50 bonus. That's a lot of money in 1860. So, bonus jumpers. Yes, sir.
How many of the men do you think came from the Chicora and the Palmetto?
Some of them came from South Carolina. Of the crew, probably 40% or so were from North Carolina. That was the majority of them. But you had some who were from South Carolina, probably 15–20%. Same thing with Virginia, probably 15–20%. Then you had guys from Tennessee, Georgia, Texas, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York. They kind of ran Texas. They kind of ran the gamut. Ones and twos from here and there. I know that Baco served on Chicora, Palmetto State, and there were probably a handful of others that did as well, but probably just a few.
Could you go back to that second list that you had?
Yeah. Let's see. Here?
No, the second. Yeah, that's page one, page two.
Okay. There. This
No,
one?
no, not that one. The,
Go back the other way.
other way, keep going.
So if I'll go back to the beginning. How's that? You just tell me when to stop. Okay, there's the beginning. There's one.
Yep.
There's two. There's three.
Sorry.
4. That's the one I can't read. That's the list that I started with.
The next one. That one.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
So Matt, it sounds like the punishment for desertion was being sent to the Navy
Yes. Yeah.
in
And,
Kinston.
yeah. To some extent, yes.
Right. So, I mean,
A lot of these guys would do their punishment and then get transferred.
so after they got here, was there a high rate of desertion among the news crew? Or?
No, not from what I can understand. They pretty much kept most of the crew intact. Now, some of the men would transfer out and new guys would transfer in. Like one of the gunners, Eugene Williams, who is listed somewhere, right here, gunner, okay? He did not arrive here until December of 1864. But he was from Newbern. He enlisted in the Confederate Navy, was made a gunner, and then sent to the James River Squadron, which is in Richmond. And he served in the James River Squadron for a while. He rotated down here, and Eugene Porter, who is right here, another gunner, transferred and took his slot in the James River Squadron. So what you'll see is I've got over 100 names here. Not all of them served on board at the same time. I got about 100, I think it's 121 names. I estimate that probably only about 90 men and officers served on her at one time.
And
So
how many died, did you say?
we know of one who was killed, and he died of disease, and he's buried actually in Raleigh. But most of these, almost all these guys survived the war. Almost all of them. And then it's interesting to try to track them down, John Smith, after the war, and find out where they went and what they did. Or try to find out more about them before the war, where they lived and what they did. So it's a lot of puzzle pieces, and you're just trying to, okay, where does this one fit, or does this one fit, or is this even the right piece to put in the puzzle? So, yes, sir.
Did you find any of them that were linked to the Hunley?
No, not directly. Of course, Hunley sinks in February of '64.
Right.
So that's about 2.5 months before you really get a good crew here. Yeah.
James Wicks, who was with the crew of Gonzalo Wood, left Newbern and goes to Charleston.
Charleston is part of that. Yeah.
Died on
Mhm.
that.
Yep. And died with the Hunley attack. Yeah.
He was a North Carolina guy.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming today. I hope you enjoyed it.